So yeah, England they're not playing very well, Dan. To, I think that's a fair assumption, isn't it? It's probably up there with the worst World Cup defenses. It's there's a lot to choose from, but it's up there with the worst England World Cup performances in terms of as a team, which is not something I thought we'd be saying when going into it. Jos Buttler's the captain. He's inherited the captaincy from Owen Morgan. They won the World T20 last year, overcame a loss against Ireland. Didn't necessarily do it the easy way. Lost the first game, looked good against Bangladesh, but the wheels have completely come off since then. Mm-hmm. What do you think of? Can they just have just generally a little bit of your thoughts on how they've been going, and then we'll go on to talk about Butler's captaincy in general?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's an interesting one, really, because obviously, sort of headed into the tournament, you look at the wealth of talent and indeed experience that's in that side. There's some youngsters in there as well. Harry Brook was kind of shoehorned in, the weight of the media and sort of English cricket fan base just clamouring to get Harry Brook in there. Obviously meant that he got in ultimately. I think it was at the expense of Jason Roy, wasn't it? Who had a bit of a back spasm and stuff like that, and sat out the Ireland warm-up games. And the Ireland warm-up games are kind of a key point amongst all of this for me, because they were such a nonsense for so many reasons. Obviously, playing Ireland in what was late September, my own personal cricket season had well stopped by the time them games were going ahead. And you just look at it and go, what are they doing? Because it was a pretty much like quite a heavily rotated England side playing Ireland in the UK. Like I say, when it's freezing cold, doesn't in any way, shape or form sort of emulate or resemble what they're going to be getting up to in India. So didn't make a lot of sense. But sort of putting that to one side, you do look, like I say, some of the players, some of the talent, and the fact that these players are now playing all around the world all year round, including in India in the IPL, because for years, you mentioned sort of historic World Cup efforts, or not efforts, as this one is now. But years ago, England had sort of excuses by why they suffered, certainly in the subcontinent, certainly in India. But this time around, that doesn't exist, because these players, like I say, are used to playing out there. They do it a lot and they succeed a lot. So that's kind of been taken away from them now. And I'm shocked by just how poor they've been. I truly am. It felt like India were definitely the favourites going into this tournament. There's no two ways about that. A home nation, and the ridiculous strength and depth that they've got. They could name two, possibly even three sides that would be really competitive. But for England to go into it with, like I say, some of the names, the star-studded squad, if you like, and if you can leave out the likes of Jason Roy, who on his day in recent years has been absolutely outstanding, you'd like to think that you were going to give a good account of yourselves, but it just hasn't happened at all. It looks like a side massively, for me, and it's quite a strong word to use, but there's been a little bit of arrogance about the English cricket team when it comes to this World Cup, because you mentioned the holders, you mentioned the very feeble defence there, but they've taken 50 over cricket for granted. And I do wonder whether there's a wider conversation around this, of course, but T20 is absolutely the forefront of everyone's cricketing thoughts now, of course it is, but in this country, the 100, and we're the only one who plays the 100, of course. So that takes up quite a large chunk of the summer, and 50 over cricket is kind of an afterthought now. And that all leads to this effort, in inverted commas, in the World Cup. And you do wonder whether the fact that, like I say, 50 over cricket is so forgotten about, that if you then go into a World Cup so undercooked, so unprepared, and just go into it thinking, well, we're boss at T20. We play this 100 stuff, so clearly that converts. But clearly it doesn't.
Just to move it on to Buttler himself now. I heard this morning England have got a 4% chance of qualifying for the semi-finals. But I think it's slightly, the stats may say that, but it'd be a miracle if they do. There'll be people calling for his head as captain. I think people will obviously want him to carry on, because he's our greatest ever one day or white ball batsman, arguably. He does incredible things with a reasonable degree of regularity. Mm-hmm. But his captaincy, there's been a lot of questions. There's been a lot of questions about his decisions at the toss. There's been a lot of questions about the team elections, the big kind of reactive team elections. Oh, that didn't work. We'll try these. Or that didn't work. We'll go back to Wokes and all that sort of business.
Yeah.
How would you answer captaincy, and what part do you think it's played to the poor performances that they've showed so far?
Yeah, it's definitely. He definitely hasn't captained the side well. I think that's a fair sort of assumption to make. I've captained cricket teams in the past and done it to a fair degree of competence, I would like to think. And the team playing under me might think differently. But I wouldn't suggest that Jos Buttler has stood out necessarily as a leader. And it is one of them, isn't it? You mentioned sort of his quality there, and I said earlier on about sort of some of these England players are used to travelling the world now and being absolute star names, and Jos Buttler is right at the top of that list. Like, of course he is, and you do wonder whether the captaincy has been given to him just because of that experience, his knowledge of playing in these different conditions. He has all of that, of course he does, but he's certainly, prior to this World Cup, the best player, but is he the best captain for that side? I had my reservations to begin with. They've obviously not been sort of diminished at all, given what's gone in this World Cup. I think he has made reactive decisions. I do also have to question the coach, Matthew Mott, of course. I'm not entirely sure he was ever the best man for the job, because you look at best in class around world cricket, and the IPL harbours a lot of the best coaches, in my opinion. It's a difficult one. Cricket isn't like football in so much as national teams tend to have quite sort of fluid coaching staff. And what I mean by that is it doesn't necessarily have to be an Englishman coaching the cricket team and so on and so forth. Years ago, maybe that was the case, but less so now. So I'm not entirely sure that's a major issue, but I don't know whether it's such a difficult question and such a difficult one to sort of breach in terms of the coach captaincy. Because when you look at, if you're a team player, if you're one of the lads, you're Johnny Bairstow, even Joe Root, whoever it may be, and Jos Buttler is speaking to you, you sit up and listen, because there's a man who has travelled the world, smashing hundreds left, right and centre, essentially. And the same could be said for Joe Root, and the same could be said for Owen Morgan when he was captain of the England cricket team. That obviously part of Morgan's sort of demise as captain for me, because he led absolutely outstandingly during his tenure. His demise as captain came about when people started questioning his form, and he just didn't warrant a place in the side anymore. Yeah. Now, that's not the case with Buttler, of course, but when your captain is your best player, you do sit up and listen. But I do wonder with the coach, and not really having sort of the background or the CV to back up leading and telling the likes of Jos Buttler, Joe Root, Ben Stokes in this World Cup, of course, Johnny Bairstow, telling them how he thinks they should be going out of the business. I'm not saying they're not listening to him, but you do question whether they're really sort of engaging and taking on board what he's saying, because they've been there and done it. I'm not entirely sure he has. So the Buttler one's interesting. I don't think he's captained the side particularly well. You mentioned the word reactive there. I think that's absolutely spot on. I think some of the team selections have left a lot to be desired, and they only come down to coach and captain. They're the two people. I think I'm right in saying that my knowledge of cricket and my knowledge of being around the game for years and years would suggest that they're the two that pick the team, and they've got it wrong on numerous occasions now for me. So, yeah, not a great sort of endorsement of captain nor coach, really. And it wouldn't surprise me. I think Jos Buttler's 33 now. Is he going to make the next 50 over World Cup? There'd be huge question marks around that. And it wouldn't surprise me if he or Matthew Moss were stepping aside after this tournament, because it has been so bad. This isn't, a time of recording, England play India on Sunday, another heavy defeat there, and we could be bottom of this group, like, quite comfortably. Netherlands joint with, Afghanistan joint with. It isn't just sort of bowing out gracefully at this stage. It's absolutely humiliating. So both of them will be looking at themselves and going, yeah, we might be in trouble here.
Yeah. So do you think that's the way forward then? Because as you say, he is 33 now. They fielded a side the other day, everybody over the age of 30, which was the first time that had ever happened in a World Cup. So there's obviously going to be, Milan's not going to be there. Bairstow, Holtz. There was questions about the wisdom of him coming back for this anyway, given that he was supposed to be having knee surgery. There's going to be wholesale change. It could be another 2015 style, out with the old and in with the new. I don't think Butler will be kind of cold as a player, but do you think it's now time for them to need a younger new captain and maybe even a Brook or somebody like that? Or God, I don't know, Phil Salt. I mean, who knows what makeup of the team's going to be in the next 6 months? What do you think they're going to do, or what would you do?
This feels like the perfect sort of line in the sand, watershed moment, whatever you want to call it. If England do go out of this tournament, they're dumped out rather unceremoniously, like it looks like they're going to be over the coming week or so, maybe 2 weeks. It does feel like a time whereby you do sort of sit back and take stock, and you do make them wholesale changes that you're referring to. The age of the side isn't impressive at all for me. I mean, even you look at Liam Livingstone, he's probably the younger statesman in it, and even he's just recently turned 30. So it's not a young team. There's loads of high-quality young cricketers knocking around in the county game. You mentioned Phil Salt there. There's a lot more to be added to that as well. And it does feel, though, England need to go in a different direction. And for me, that would be sort of belts and braces, complete whole change of direction, including the coach, including the captain. I think if you're going to do it, you may as well do it properly. And that wouldn't include just sort of a couple of changes here and there. I think you go all in and you do make them, like I say, the sweeping changes, get the youngsters involved, really mix it up. And you mentioned Harry Brook. Harry Brook feels like the future of this England cricket team, probably across all formats, I would say. So he's got to be quite central amongst all of that, because England are clearly doubling down on his talents, and rightfully so, because he's an unbelievable cricketer. But there's enough youngsters around the county circuit right now, and you might not sort of cull them all. Your Mark Woods of this world, Liam Livingstone, as I mentioned, those types, David Willey potentially, those types might stick around, carrying on playing for a few more years yet in the 50-over game. But I do wonder whether this sort of, like I say, this humiliating, quite embarrassing campaign so far does lead to a massive overhaul. I think you'll see a few retirements on the back of it, maybe a few people going back into retirement on the back of it as well. But yeah, for me, it would be a case of let's really sweep the board clean now and get a whole fresh start, because it's been catastrophic. It truly has. And whiteboard cricket, as much as we've lauded the Bairstows, the Butlers of this world, etc., Jason Roy in the previous era as well, it's a young man's game. Like, it really is. Like, I know from experience, it's a young man's game, and I don't know whether some of them have got the heart, the desire, whatever it may be, the will to go again. Certainly not in India. I think it was the Afghanistan game the other day when it was 30-odd, 40 degrees, and you just looked at some of them and think, I'm not entirely sure they wanted to be there. And I know it wasn't going their way in terms of the game and stuff like that, and they knew they were on the wrong end of a humbling, essentially, from one of the lesser minnow nations in world cricket. But when it's not going well and you're sort of up against it and you're in that sort of draining heat, you do sort of men from the boys. And unfortunately, I don't think England have really stood up to be counted. And a lot of that is down to they've been to the well one too many times, I think, some of them.
Yeah. Okay, Dan, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much.